In the literature, you will find that for patients with suspected hospital-acquired pneumonia or ventilator-associated pneumonia, you should start antibiotic therapy that will cover all probable gram-positive and gram-negative pathogens. Okay, but which ones exactly? Well, when it comes to gram-positive ones, your main concern is MRSA, because most other gram-positive pathogens will be covered by pretty much any antibiotic you choose, but MRSA will not. It is susceptible only to a handful of antibiotics, and this is why, when putting together empiric therapy, it is essential to determine whether or not it is necessary to cover MRSA in the first place. If you decide that you do need to cover MRSA, the most common choice for MRSA infections, including pneumonia, is still vancomycin. For severe infections, you start with a loading dose, but afterwards you have to measure the concentration of vancomycin and adjust dosing accordingly. Without measurement, it's next to impossible to determine the optimum dose. The dosing of vancomycin deserves an entire separate lecture, and if I start to explain it here, we will wander away from our topic. I dedicate an entire lesson to the correct dosing of vancomycin in my courses. It is not difficult, but you have to go step by step without skipping. Fortunately, most of the time, when you do start vancomycin, you will be able to discontinue it before you even get to the problem of finding the perfect maintenance dose. This is because we generally tend to overdo it with vancomycin out of fear of MRSA. But if you take the necessary microbiological samples before you start treatment, once they come back negative for MRSA, you can safely discontinue vancomycin. The quickest and most useful test here is a nasal swab PCR for MRSA. If the nasal swab PCR for MRSA is negative, you can safely discontinue vancomycin because your patient's pneumonia is almost certainly not caused by MRSA. This test has a very high negative predictive value, which means that a negative result effectively excludes MRSA. If you don't have this test, well, then you have to wait a couple of days until other respiratory samples and blood cultures come back negative for MRSA, and then you can discontinue vancomycin safely. Now, should you have included vancomycin in your treatment regimen in the first place? Well, I have already made a video on this topic, but in short, we cover MRSA with vancomycin if the probability of MRSA infection is high, or if the risk of missing MRSA outweighs the risks of unnecessary antibiotics for a couple of days. So let's break this down. What would make us think that the risk of MRSA is high? Well, recent and frequent exposure to antibiotics, especially broad-spectrum antibiotics, the fact that MRSA is a common pathogen in our hospital or ward, and crucially, if our patient was already infected or colonized with MRSA sometime in the last 12 months. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you know for a fact that MRSA was recently present, of course you will cover it. What about the second point, the danger of missing MRSA? Well, if our patient with hospital-acquired pneumonia is septic, especially in septic shock, has developed ARDS, or is immunocompromised, of course, we will include coverage for MRSA right away, because if it is MRSA and we fail to start appropriate treatment with such patients, the risk of a poor outcome, including death, is very high. In the simplest of terms, these are the most important risk factors for MRSA. If they are present, coverage is recommended. If they are not, you probably don't need to include vancomycin empirically. But if you do, again, at least take all the necessary samples, especially a nasal PCR for MRSA, so that you can de-escalate later and spare your patient's kidneys of the nephrotoxicity of vancomycin. Besides vancomycin, another fantastic option for MRSA pneumonia is Linezolid. I'm sure you are familiar with it. There is a lot of back and forth between vancomycin and Linezolid. For pneumonia specifically, there is research suggesting that Linezolid is somewhat superior, but there are also studies where there was no noticeable difference. One thing is pretty certain. Linezolid is at least as good as vancomycin, and it does not increase the risk of renal failure. It's not nephrotoxic, as opposed to vancomycin, right? You may have read that it's myelotoxic, but the key thing to remember here is that it takes time for this effect to develop, at least 10 days or 2 weeks of treatment. So, with pneumonia, where much shorter regimens are usually needed, you don't have to worry about that. So, in this context, you really don't have to worry about myelotoxicity of Linezolid. In summary, between Vancomycin and Linezolid, you should almost always be able to find a good option for suspected MRSA pneumonia. Okay, so much for MRSA, but what about gram-negative bacteria like Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, and Acinetobacter? They are even more common causes of hospital-acquired pneumonia than MRSA. For example, in my hospital, we almost never get MRSA, but we have plenty of Klebsiella, Acinetobacter, and other gram-negative rods. Well, as opposed to MRSA, for gram-negative bacteria, there is no single antibiotic that will reliably cover all of them. It simply doesn't exist. That's because they can harbor very diverse and very powerful resistance mechanisms, and you simply have to know what kind of bacteria circulate in your ward and what antibiotics they are usually susceptible to. Without that, it's next to impossible to come up with a reliable empiric regimen. You also have to do your best to find out if your patient was recently infected or colonized with resistant gram-negative bacteria, and if possible, see which antibiotics these bacteria were susceptible to. As you can see, when it comes to risk factors, the logic is the same as with MRSA. A history of antibiotic use, local epidemiology, and previous isolates. Now, in the absence of the most powerful resistance mechanisms like carbapenemases or a high prevalence of Acinetobacter, which is intrinsically resistant to most antibiotics, right? Anti-pseudomonal beta-lactams should be a good choice for empiric coverage of most gram-negative bacteria. And this makes sense, doesn't it? If they work against Pseudomonas, one of the most problematic gram-negative bacteria, you know that these antibiotics will also cover a wide variety of other gram-negative bacteria. If you've seen my lecture on Pseudomonas or my course on antibiotics, you know which drugs fall into this category. They are very well known and widely used in hospitals all over the world. One antibiotic is usually enough for empiric coverage, but for septic, severely ill patients, you might add a second anti-pseudomonal agent as backup, just until you hopefully isolate the pathogen and find out exactly what it's susceptible to. The intention, of course, is to increase the likelihood that at least one of these drugs will be active against the bacterium that is causing your patient's pneumonia. But once you know for sure what you are dealing with, once you know its susceptibility in a couple of days, of course, you will de-escalate to a single drug. Now, if your standard anti-pseudomonal antibiotics are not enough, because you have multi-drug resistant, including carbapenem-resistant bacteria in your ward like Klebsiella pneumoniae OXA48, NDM, or Acinetobacter, well, this is beyond the scope of a 10-minute lecture like this. You need to understand the logic behind the antibiotics that are applicable here. It is not difficult and it doesn't take a lot of time to learn, but structure is key. I could offer you a few tips here, but disjointed facts are easy to forget, and even if they feel like they make sense in the beginning, you will forget them before you know it, speaking from experience. But once you understand the system and everything finally clicks, now that is something completely different. And as far as I know, this is the only way to actually understand antibiotics and become proficient enough to avoid the most dangerous mistakes. I explain all of that in detail in my course on hospital-acquired infections. You will master it in a couple of hours, no problem, but again, structure is key. You need a step-by-step approach. And I would like to emphasize once again, whatever kind of empiric regimen you choose, always take microbiological samples first and don't be afraid to de-escalate once you confirm or exclude certain pathogens, especially MRSA. Save your patient's kidneys and keep treatment precise and short. Regarding the duration of treatment, 7 days will be enough for most patients with pneumonia. There will be times when a slightly longer course is required, but most of the time, 7 days is enough. If you find this lecture helpful so far, be sure to share it with colleagues who could benefit from it. One final tip. Every year, during flu season, many patients with influenza end up in the ICU on mechanical ventilators, and within this group, many will develop ventilator-associated pneumonia. And there, we must not forget that influenza predisposes patients to all sorts of bacterial, but also fungal pathogens. Pulmonary aspergillosis is one of the most common infectious complications of severe influenza pneumonia in patients on mechanical ventilators. So, if your patient's ventilator-associated pneumonia is not responding to treatment with antibiotics, always consider the possibility of a fungal infection and order microbiological tests to exclude or confirm it. If you're a hospitalist, you know that hospital-acquired infections are something that affects us all, and with the increasing frequency and diversity of antimicrobial resistance, none of us can afford to ignore it anymore. You can't just have one favorite antibiotic that you will use to treat everything. It doesn't work that way. We are way past that. Being able to choose optimal therapy for severely ill patients is an essential skill for every acute care clinician. And if you follow just a few clear rules, it's really not difficult. You'll see that in my course. The feedback from previous participants has been fantastic. Once you enroll, you get 90-day access to all lectures and you get all accompanying materials as PDFs. Once you go through the lessons and everything clicks, you will realize you've gained a powerful new skill, not just a collection of disjointed facts. So, why not acquire it now? A patient who needs your expertise might come in tomorrow. I hope to see you in the course. Take care.